every one of their intellectual opponents, be it a conservative, a libertarian, an old school liberal, virtually anyone who doesn't bow to all of their authority is somehow a bigot or a racist or a homophobe or anything else.
My first guest is a political talk show host and a former liberal who says free speech is under attack by the regressive left. He says they're less tolerant than any conservative he's ever met. And he also believes Democrats are bowing to the most extreme elements of their party and will destroy it. Would you please welcome Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report. Dave, it's an honor to have you here. I'm going to jump right into this and let's talk about what has happened to the Democrat Party or the left or to the progressive movement. It seems like they've truly gone off the deep end.
Well, Governor, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And yes, it doesn't bring me any great pleasure to actually have to talk about this. You know, I think you as a conservative and most conservatives want a decent left. You want to have intellectual arguments with good liberals. And by the way, there is a history of good liberals in the country that you may have differences of opinions with, but that fundamentally believe that America is a good place and that the Constitution is a wonderful governing document and things like that. There are decent liberals over the years, classical liberals, such as JFK or Daniel Patrick Moynihan, or I'm from New York, Mayor Ed Koch, old school liberals who didn't want the government to absolutely do everything, but perhaps wanted a little more government than, say, a conservative or a libertarian might. What's happened in the last, say, 6 or 7 years is that the progressive movement, which really is socialism just masked as democratic socialism or whatever they're calling it, which, by the way, they're gonna axe the word democratic by the next election cycle. I mean, they're basically admitting they're socialists at this point, the Bernie and Elizabeth Warren wing of this thing. They've decided that not only is the government the end-all authority on virtually everything, but that also, and this is the really sort of perverse part of this, that every one of their intellectual opponents, be it a conservative, a libertarian, an old school liberal, virtually anyone who doesn't bow to all of their authority is somehow a bigot or a racist or a homophobe or anything else. And for me, as someone that was a lefty my whole life, I mean, I was part of this thing. My political awakening, as I've talked about it and met more people in the middle of the country and talked to 14,000 people at Liberty University. I mean, I never would have thought I would have ever spoke there years ago, and met just dozens and hundreds and thousands, actually, because I was on tour last year with Jordan Peterson, thousands of people all over the world who I have some political disagreements with, but are happy to agree to disagree and want to live in a pluralistic society. And unfortunately, that's just not where the left is right now. So I will always build bridges with people like you for whatever our differences may be, because I know you'd be happy to discuss them, and so would I. And that's the beauty of what living in America is all about.
I think you said it beautifully just then, Dave. I'm curious, what was the turning point for you? When was it that you one day said, these people have gone off and left me? It's a bridge too far.
You know, there were several moments that I started thinking something is wrong here. I'll give you one. You know, I've told these stories many times. I'll give you one interesting one because I suspect that you know the guy that I'm going to be talking about. But years ago, about 5 years ago, I was on air at the Young Turks, and they're a far left progressive network. That was the network I was working for. And they were showing a clip of Fox News. And you must know David Webb over there, right? You
Yes.
must know David.
I do.
Yeah, so David is a good man. He's a conservative. He happens to be black. And I say happens to be black because that it doesn't define him. It's one of the characteristics about him, that he's a conservative.
Yeah.
And years ago, I had a show on Sirius XM radio, and I was a lefty at the time, and David's a conservative on the Patriot Channel. And we met in the hallway one day. We struck up a conversation, and every other week I'd go on his show. We'd argue. We'd, talk about issues. So he became a good friend of mine. And then it's a few years later, I'm on air at the Young Turks, and David, I think, was guest hosting for Sean Hannity that night. And they're playing clips of him, and they're talking about how he's an Uncle Tom, he's a sellout, he's a grifter, he doesn't believe anything he's saying, how could he do this to black people? And suddenly it was so stark, it hit me in the most clear possible way that these people who purport to be for diversity and purport to be for tolerance and the rest of it, they see a black man who doesn't think the way they want him to think, and suddenly they can apply all of the worst labels that you could possibly say about anybody to him. And I thought, David's not the racist here. It's actually you guys, because you say you're for black people or you're for women or you're for other minorities, but every time someone from those communities speaks differently than you want them to, you hate them for it. Another example of this would be, they say they're for women, but they're not for Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They're not for Nikki Haley. They say they're for black people. They're not for Candace Owens or Thomas Sowell or any Larry Elder, people like that. Or they'll say they're for gay people, but they're certainly not for someone like Peter Thiel, who's a supporter of Trump. So this is the bizarre reality that the left has created. They're for groups, and every time you're for a group, you actually crush the individual. And I'm for individuals. I believe that you can know and control and live the best life for yourself. And that's a bottom-up way of looking at the world, and they want a top-down way of looking at the world.
You really, I think, hit a nerve when you were talking about the fact that the left likes to look at people in groups. And I've often said, as long as the left can keep people in their group, they can win, because all they got to do is keep the groups grouped up together. Conservatives, we tend to see people as individuals. We don't see them as black or white or gay or Presbyterian or Jewish. We tend to see them as individuals. And I think that's a fundamental difference. Would that be an assessment you would also agree to?
Well, yeah, it's the fundamental difference between, say, leftism and conservatism. But it also is the most fundamental building block that you can have, not only for a country. I mean, we have this in America, this beautiful document called the Constitution that lays out our rights, and then the Bill of Rights, which expands those rights. But the government did not give us our rights, right? These are God-given rights. These rights, the government can take away your rights, but it can't give them to you. But once you say the group is above the individual, you have to throw out the individual who thinks freely, who takes another position. So a very simple way I could explain this to you is, so on an issue like abortion, you see something right now where the left, which used to basically say, we're for abortion, but you can't have abortions 8 months in. They had some guardrails against it. Now, of course, Governor, you as a conservative, now you're completely against that, and that's just fine. But the left used to have some semblance of a mechanism to be able to fight its most radical elements. They no longer do. So everyone on stage right now at these debates, and Biden might be the slight exception, I'm not even sure, but these people, they won't put an end point on abortion. I mean, everyone in their right mind, of course, knows that at 7 months, this is a child. This is a living being. So this is the problem, that once you start viewing people as the collective, you're unable to understand that they might have differences with you because you've defined them already. And what I would rather do, and I think conservatives have been very good at this in the last couple of years, is say, I don't care what your sexuality is, I don't care what your gender is or your skin color or the rest of it. Do you have good ideas? And can we work together to hopefully create a society that's truly tolerant for as many people as possible? And that's why I consistently find myself building bridges in places that I didn't think would have existed a couple of years ago.
Speaking of bridges, one bridge that may have been broken down is the bridge in Congress between Democrats and Republicans over impeachment. The Democrats said they had an airtight case. It was rock solid. They had the president dead to right. They were convinced that their case was absolutely, to use a phrase, unimpeachable. It gets to the Senate, and they want to add to it. They wanted to bring witnesses in. It's like saying, here's the soup. It's perfect. But nobody will eat it, so let's take it back in the kitchen and add some more stuff. Assess for us what this impeachment process has done to America and whether it will help or hurt the Democrats in this country.
Well, it's deeply dangerous what happened here with impeachment. Now, I was not for impeachment from the beginning. There's no doubt that Ukraine is corrupt. There's no doubt that Trump had reason to look into it. And I'm sure all of your viewers are well aware of that video with Biden basically admitting what we were doing over there. So putting that aside, the bigger danger here is that the framers were deeply, deeply worried about what just happened. What just happened was the House, on a purely partisan basis, decided to assault another branch of government. The legislative branch decided to attack the executive branch, the branch of the presidency, on a partisan nature. This is deeply, deeply dangerous, because what it leads to is the idea that no election will truly ever matter. That if you ever get the opposition voted in as the executive, as the president, that if you have a partisan legislative branch that wants to take him or her out, that they will go ahead and do it. So it's deeply dangerous. And to answer your subsequent question, this idea that this is going to somehow help the Democrats is completely crazy, because if you ever wanted to fire up all of the base, all of the Trump voters, if you wanted to make sure, because, sometimes in a re-election cycle, the base doesn't come out again, or maybe it just doesn't have as much excitement as it did the first time. But if you want to fire up those people, what do? You do this crazy partisan impeachment. Now, all of those people come out. And then there's another piece of this that I haven't heard people talking about on cable news, which is I think that there's a certain amount of people that are somewhat apolitical, but they don't like the idea of all the government nonsense and we're going to destroy everybody and the rest of it. And they actually do want to defend the office of the presidency. And I think those people now are going to break for Trump as well. So I think the Democrats are really going to regret this. And not only that, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I disagree with on virtually every policy issue, she actually made a decent point about a week or two ago. She said that basically she and Joe Biden shouldn't be in the same party. And I think she's right. The socialists and whatever last remaining old school liberal there is should not be in the same party anymore. And I think, aided by impeachment, I think all of this could potentially lead to the end of the Democratic Party and sort of a real split between the socialists and whatever is left of the old school Democrats.
Dave, Bernie Sanders is on the verge of maybe winning the Iowa caucuses next week for the Democrats. Could put him on a track to get the nomination. Does that alone potentially split the Democrat Party?
That might be it right there. I mean, because there are a lot of Democrats, again, people that you as a conservative would disagree with on, say, taxes or abortion or a litany of issues, but that are decent Americans that, you just have a political disagreement with. But I think there are a ton of people that will say this is too much. Bernie talks about fundamentally transforming America. That is deeply dangerous. We live in the freest society in the history of the world, where 340 million people have come from all walks of life, from every corner on earth. They've melted into the melting pot, right? They've become part of the rich American tapestry that we have. Are we perfect? No, but there's no such thing as perfection. Humans are flawed, so we can't have a political system that's flawed. But when Bernie says he wants to fundamentally transform it, I view that as such a deeply dangerous idea, because we've done something so great here. What we should be trying to do is expand freedom where we can on the margins, when we can do that. But fundamentally transform is deeply dangerous. And in a weird way, I actually think having Sanders go against Trump is probably the best thing that could happen for conservatives, because then it will fully be like the idea of socialism versus capitalism. It'll be collectivism versus individualism, and it'll all sort of be out on the table. And I think America has such a rich history of the individual. It is so deeply embedded in us in a way that it isn't in Europe, that I think Sanders will ultimately be crushed. But it'll really depend on whether the people come out and support Trump or not. That second time around, which, as I said earlier, sometimes there's just a little exhaustion there.
Well, Dave Rubin, thank you so much. Quite frankly, I think if we couldn't watch all of this year for free, we'd all buy tickets. It would be worth it. Delighted to have you. Thank you.
We absolutely would, and I look forward to having you in here one day, Governor. Thank you very much.
Look forward to it, Dave. Thank you. Our thanks to Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report, which you can find at rubinreport.com. Also, follow Dave on social media. Also, that's at Rubin Report.